Hello, Archie Dunlop here with Talking Astrology with Archie on Monday, April the 1st, 2024. So it's Easter Monday, and I know that recently I've been a bit obnoxious, sort of being negative about America, suggesting that it's perhaps a sort of a godless society, as if America is unique. I mean, the grass is always greener, isn't it? Whatever country one's living in, one always thinks it's better somewhere else. But of course, it's not just about America, isn't it? I suppose the world in some respects is becoming more secular. When I was living in Slovakia, that was actually the first time I really noticed that people weren't taking Good Friday seriously. I remember walking through a shopping mall in Bratislava on Good Friday, and I was kind of quite surprised. It just seemed to be just an ordinary day, and but I suppose that's the way things are going. And in Slovakia, I remember we were talking to someone, and they were saying what day of Easter they regarded as being most important, and they didn't regard Good Friday or Easter Sunday as being the most important day, but actually they regarded Easter Monday as being the most important day. The reason being because in Slovakia there was a tradition where boys would throw water at girls. This was an Easter Monday tradition. I think it even had a name. I can't remember what it is. So, well, at least I suppose there's some tradition there, but it seems a very strange tradition. So if you're in Slovakia and you're female today, I suppose you have to be careful. Now, as far as what I want to talk about today, the moon is in Capricorn. So it's not really a very foolish April Fool's Day. I mean, a moon in Capricorn is quite serious, isn't it? And as the moon's going to Capricorn, and as I couldn't see anything in the news that really grabbed me, I'm going to just talk about moon in Capricorn, and I'm going to look at some people who have moon in Capricorn. And traditionally, moon in Capricorn doesn't work very well, but it can be very useful to have moon in Capricorn. It's very focused on material things, or very often is, and moon in Capricorn can certainly get things done. And so, yes, I'm going to just go through a list of people with moon in Capricorn. But before I do that, I want to look at the astrology and the I Ching for today, which is Monday, April the 1st, 2024. Here is the positions of the planets today, set for New York. Top right, there are some people who've got moon in Capricorn. Melania Trump has got moon in Capricorn. I think actually that fits pretty well. We've got Nazi propaganda minister Joseph Goebbels, and the mayor of London, Sadiq Khan, Hunter Biden, the former head of Wagner, Yevgeny Prighozin, and Governor of California, Gavin Newsom. But I'll be talking about these people a bit later. And so, yes, so these are the positions of planets for April the 1st. As you can see, the moon is in Capricorn. The moon went into Capricorn today at 5:05 a.m. London time. So that means that if you're on the west coast of the US, then yes, moon would have gone into Capricorn last night. If you're in Australia, the moon won't go into Capricorn until the late afternoon. So kind of depends on your time zone, but I think that all of us are going to have moon in Capricorn at some stage today. So we've got this movement from moon in Sagittarius to moon in Capricorn. Moon in Sagittarius is quite a wild energy traditionally. It's a fire sign. It's about action, wanting to make things happen. maybe acting first, thinking later. But then Moon goes into Capricorn. This does slow things down. It might be a holiday, not a holiday in the United States, but in many places it is a holiday, Easter Monday. But even though it is a holiday with Moon in Capricorn, it's difficult to relax. We are thinking about what needs to be done, and there can certainly be a materialistic side to Moon in Capricorn, and thinking about money and work and our own interests. That's it. I mean, Moon in Capricorn very often is about our own interests. We have to think about the interests of ourselves and our family, and perhaps put outsiders' interests second. And I don't actually think there's anything wrong with that. That's just using the energy of Moon in Capricorn in the right way. Though we should not forget that the Moon is in its detriment in Capricorn. The Moon rules Cancer, therefore it's in its detriment in Capricorn. So it doesn't work particularly well in Capricorn. And the Moon in Capricorn is particularly a problem during the hours of daylight. The hours of night, it's not so bad because the Moon rules the Earth signs by night. Venus rules the Earth signs by day. At least I'm using the rulerships as outlined by William Lilly in Christian Astrology, his 17th century textbook of astrology. I mean, I know there are different approaches to the triplicities, with triplicities being the air triplicity, the fire triplicity, the water triplicity, the earth triplicity. With the earth triplicity, Virgo, Capricorn, and Taurus, yes, by night it's ruled by the Moon, by day it's ruled by Venus. So the Earth is in its own triplicity by night. So all things being equal, the Moon in Capricorn isn't going to be so bad when it's dark, or when the sun has set, or before the sun has risen. The Moon in Capricorn does make a sextile aspect to Mars in Pisces. I think that's actually quite a useful sextile. It allows us to engage in constructive activity. So if there's something we need to do, perhaps of a material nature, I think we'll be able to do it quite well. We won't have to spend too much time thinking about it. We'll just be able to just get on with it. And so I do think that is quite fortunate. Before the Moon goes into Capricorn, just before, there is a square between the Moon and Neptune. Now, this may not apply to you if you are in Europe and the Americas. By the time you're awake, the Moon, this square aspect between the Moon and Neptune, will have moved on. But it's if you're in Australia and New Zealand, the Moon square Neptune could be a feature of the day. Not just Australia and New Zealand. I don't know if you're in the Philippines or Japan. Moon square Neptune could be there. There could be a certain amount of confusion. Moon in Sagittarius square Neptune in Pisces. Perhaps responding to things at an emotional level in a maybe inappropriate way, not being able to read the room, just getting confused about something, acting too quickly without really understanding what's going on, and perhaps making mistakes. But that's only if you're in East Asia, Australia, New Zealand, I suppose. Depends what time you get up, and it's more of a feature of the beginning of the day. Mercury does go stationary retrograde today, London time. London time, that happens at quarter past 11 at night. So right at the end of the day, Mercury goes stationary retrograde. So that means that if you're in Europe, continental Europe, most of continental Europe, okay, not Portugal, but other parts of continental Europe. I forget what time zone Spain is on, but overall, but it won't happen until Tuesday if you're in continental Europe, Mercury going stationary retrograde, and if you're in Asia, Australia, New Zealand, then yes, it's something that's happening on Tuesday. But if you're in the UK and the Americas, Mercury goes retrograde, stationary retrograde on the Monday. But I'm not sure if the precise moment of Mercury going retrograde is particularly important. The point is Mercury is coming to a standstill and preparing to go retrograde. So if there was something you were planning on doing that was perhaps important, maybe you should consider the possibility that you've missed your moment, especially if it's something big that required a lot of organization and it's something that can be delayed. It may be a situation where you should be considering a delay until the end of April. If not, with Mercury retrograde, we can expect things not to go entirely to plan. And there could be delays, traffic jams. We have to be very careful that we understand what people are talking about. So if we're being told something important, we should ask them to repeat themselves. We really need to make sure that we've understood what they're talking about, because it's so easy to jump to conclusions with Mercury going retrograde. And it's Mercury going retrograde in Aries. So with Mercury going retrograde in Aries, Aries is an impulsive sign. Mercury wants to jump to conclusions, and when Mercury is going retrograde in Aries, we really can jump to conclusions with potentially disastrous results. So we shouldn't take what people say at face value, ask them to repeat themselves, perhaps ask them to put it in writing if it's something important. And if we're sending emails, text messages, don't just send it off. Just read very carefully what you've said, because everything does have an implication, and it's just so easy to be misunderstood. Even if we've got our words right, it's still possible that the other person, the other party, will misunderstand what we've got to say. And I should also point out that today, aside from Mercury going stationary retrograde, the Sun is conjunct the Mercury-Neptune midpoint. So the Mercury-Neptune midpoint is about confusion, confused ideas about things, not really understanding the full picture, and perhaps putting our mental energies into the wrong areas. So that's more evidence that we can mess things up, just not fully understanding what is going on. But Jupiter is aspecting the Mercury-Mars midpoint. So that does give a slightly different picture. I mean, there's Mercury, there's Mars, and so Mercury-Mars midpoint is somewhere around here. Jupiter's making a semi-square aspect to the Mercury-Mars midpoint. I suppose I should... there it is. Quite close today, Jupiter on the Mercury-Mars midpoint. So only 7 minutes orb at midday. So Jupiter on the Mercury-Mars midpoint. In spite of everything I have said about communication issues, if we have really understood what's going on, we can communicate effectively. Mercury-Mars as a pair is about getting our message across, perhaps in quite an assertive way. And in order to not be affected by Mercury going retrograde, we have to be very clear. Yes, we can be effective communicators, particularly if we put a lot of energy into it, but we must make it simple. If we use too many words, then we'll just confuse people and people won't know what we're talking about, or they'll jump to the wrong conclusion. But if we use very simple language, we can communicate with great power and effectiveness, even though Mercury is going stationary retrograde. I should also look at the heliocentric position, just as a matter of form, just as a reminder that it can be useful to look at the solar system from the perspective of the sun, which you could say, well, we should be looking at it from the perspective of the sun because the sun is in the middle of the solar system. By definition, it is the solar system. And like yesterday, when we look at Mercury is at 12 Virgo. From a heliocentric perspective, Mercury is opposition Saturn today. With Mercury opposition Saturn, remember, this is heliocentric, putting the sun in the middle of the solar system. There's the Earth at 12 degrees Libra. And the Earth will always be exactly opposition the position of the sun. So with Mercury opposition Saturn, communications really could be difficult, in spite of the fact that Jupiter is on the Mercury-Mars conjunction. Sorry, not conjunction. Jupiter. In spite of Jupiter, geocentric Jupiter being on the Mercury-Mars midpoint. Saturn opposition Mercury, it makes things sluggish, and we can perhaps have a negative view of the world. Mercury is not just about how we communicate, it's how we're thinking about ourselves, our prospects, and with this heliocentric Mercury-Saturn opposition, things could be a bit slow. And I think that because the heliocentric positions are about the world in general, there may be a sense of negativity in the wider population. Just people in general know that something is wrong. At least they do today. And I know that, Easter Monday, for many people, is supposed to be a relaxing day, certainly a holiday in Europe. But there's something not right, and perhaps think people are thinking ahead. For example, to what's going to go on, what's going to happen with the economy. Are we going to be moving into recession or further into recession? So it does look as if people are not feeling particularly happy in many respects today, and there are things that we are worrying about, that all of us are worrying about. So that is the heliocentric position. Mercury is a fast mover. By noon on New York, yes, Mercury is being influenced by the opposition to Saturn, but Mercury is over a degree past the opposition. So maybe as the day progresses, that Mercury opposition Saturn aspect is going to lose some of its power. Okay, that's the heliocentric world, with the sun in the center of the solar system. I'm now going to go back to the geocentric universe, and I'm going to do my forecasts for the 12 signs, and I will do that the moment I've changed the coordinates back to the geocentric universe. It's the geocentric solar system. Okay, so I'm now going to give you my forecasts for the 12 signs for today, which is Monday, April the 1st, 2024. 4. Aries. I've been a little bit negative if you've been reading my general overview about what's going on astrologically today. But for Aries, actually, it doesn't seem to be too bad a day, because the moon is sextile Mars. Mars is your ruler, and the moon is in a high-profile part of your chart. The moon is in Capricorn. Now, I understand that the moon doesn't work very well in Capricorn, but from an Aries perspective, Capricorn is about how you progress forward, how you perceive yourself in the outside world, perhaps got quite a bit to do with your ego, and you want to move ahead and you want to make progress. And with Moon making a sextile to Mars, it does look as if it actually can be a very useful day. And that's probably going to be easier for you if you are in the United States, because Monday is not a holiday in the United States, it's just a normal day. So it's going to be easier to make progress and to get noticed. May require a little bit more effort if you're, for example, in Western Europe. You therefore need to consider, Aries, what are your goals? What are you trying to achieve today? Because whatever it is, I think you can get it. Okay, unless your goals are completely ridiculous, but provided they are achievable in the short term, then I think you can be successful. But you do have to consider where your power lies. It's not about drawing attention to yourself or barking orders at people. Today, your power is fairly private and secretive. People don't really know what you're doing. People don't need to know what you're doing in most cases. You just need to get on with it. And maybe the fact that it's a holiday in many places could work to your advantage. Just because everything is shut or people are busy, relaxing, enjoying the sun, if there is sun, doesn't mean that you can't do stuff. In fact, you're not going to be disturbed, and because you're not being disturbed, you can cover a lot of ground very quickly, and you can also bring to bear a fairly considerable amount of power. People may not even notice what you're doing, but you are getting results. And so I think that is that's really good news. But I can't deny that Mercury is going retrograde. Mercury is going retrograde in Aries. So if Mercury is going retrograde in Aries, it is a day when you're going to realize perhaps that some things cannot be achieved right now. You might have to put them on hold for a few weeks. And perhaps part of the problem is that people you thought were going to be available may actually not be available. You try to communicate with them, but you get feedback which is less than helpful. And that might underline the fact, Aries, that if you want to get anything done today, you might have to do it on your own. But when you're on your own, you're in control. You don't have to worry about how other people might mess things up for you. And this underlines the fact that at the moment, with the sun moving through your sign, you are overall in a strong position, and you can be quite self-contained. So if you get your priorities right, I think it can be a good day. And if you're not being noticed, don't worry about it. In fact, that's probably for the best. Taurus, you are starting to become aware of new possibilities. Maybe you had a dream recently. Could have been a daydream. And you saw a possible world that you perhaps hadn't been aware existed. Something that goes beyond your own rather fixed view of the universe. Yeah, because Taurus is a fixed sign, and you can make assumptions about the world which are just really based on the past. And today you need to move beyond that. And it could be difficult because you are so focused on certain material details that you might think, well, there's no point. You've got to stick to what you know and trust. I don't think you should stick to what you know and trust. You need to go beyond your comfort zone. Now, I do understand that Taurus is an earth sign, and that Taurians are often thinking about their material self-interest. That's okay. There's absolutely no need to apologize about that. But even then, you have to have an open mind, because if you want to really safeguard your own financial interests and your material interests, things you can touch, then you do have to think outside the box. You have to think about, the wider world and how you interact with it. Something happening thousands of miles away could have an impact on your finances, for better or for worse. And you need to acquaint yourself with that. So it's just going to be really important, Taurus, that you're not close-minded at every level. It's not just about money. It's also about what you believe in and what you don't believe in. But an expansive approach is important. And it's going to be important not just today, it's going to be important tomorrow as well, because tomorrow the moon in Capricorn makes a trine aspect to Jupiter, and Jupiter is moving through your sign. Jupiter in Taurus is about expansion. For you, it's about making the most of everything, and that's what you need to start to concentrate on. And today, you shouldn't be afraid of being assertive, because you can look at the world and you can see how it should be, and you might have a sense of your own authority. And I think it's actually okay to have a strong sense of your own authority. So if you have any position of authority, whether it's in your family, it's in your social life, or if it's at work, any form of authority, even if it's a very small amount of authority, it's a day when Taurians can leverage this. So a small amount of authority can be turned into a very large amount of authority. Perhaps it's about considering what you know about, what you're absolutely convinced that you are an authority on this subject, and you are also respected in this particular area. Maybe quite small, but if you actually leverage it, you can potentially spread your authority into other areas. So Taurus, that is certainly something that you need to consider. Gemini, today, Mercury, your ruler, goes stationary retrograde. Okay, might be tomorrow if you are no, won't be tomorrow. Sorry, let me get this right. Today, London time, at 11:15 p.m., Mercury goes stationary retrograde. So, if you're in continental Europe, Asia, Australia, New Zealand, it will be tomorrow. Nonetheless, you can feel it. Even if technically speaking, Mercury goes retrograde on Tuesday rather than Monday. I don't think we want to split hairs on this matter. You can feel Mercury, your ruler, coming to a standstill. And that could have a number of implications. It might actually impact your social life. Many Geminis do value their friends and the variety that your friends can bring. You don't want to be spending all your time with one person. You want to have another person, different experiences, different views of the world. But with Mercury going stationary retrograde, there is the possibility that some people will appear to let you down. At least you might feel that they are letting you down. I don't think they necessarily are. Because with Mercury going retrograde, people change their minds. People suddenly have new priorities. People just can't do things that they thought they could do. And also with Mercury retrograde, people might forget things, or they might just break their promises. So don't trust other people to follow through on their promises too much. And if people do not turn up to a meeting, don't get too upset about it. Though there is perhaps something you can do to improve the situation. So if, for example, if today and indeed tomorrow, if you have got some meeting or appointment with someone, don't just assume they're going to turn up, because they might not. So perhaps you should give them a reminder, though it could be your problem. You might forget to turn up to things. So, Gemini, I would advise you to look very carefully at your diary, use reminders, ask yourself what you're supposed to be doing today. Look at all the agreements you've made today and tomorrow, and make sure that you don't forget about them. I mean, it won't be your fault, but if you do forget about them, I mean, after all, it's not your fault Mercury is stationary retrograde, but nonetheless, it could have an impact on you. And also, Gemini, I know that with Mercury going through Aries, it's a very forthright sign, likes action, that your social life is important to you. I do understand that, and you want to be with people, because where there's people, there's excitement. But for one thing, Mercury going retrograde might encourage you to reconsider that. Also, Gemini, in some respects, you are becoming a little more introspective than you have been of late. You're starting to think, you're also perhaps starting to feel as well. You're starting to think and starting to feel in a different way, and you might come to the conclusion that fundamentally you're on better form when you are alone, when you've got time to think, when you've got time to feel. So that's an interesting time for Geminis, and perhaps not a typical time for Geminis, because we always associate Geminis with just being out there, doing your own thing, not being too introspective. But today you are thinking more, and actually you're starting to realize that you have a keen sense of self-interest, especially in a financial sense. Now, do we regard Geminis as having a keen sense of financial self-interest? Well, not typically, not in a textbook sense. Although I remember in the late 80s, early 90s, I remember there was a time when Gemini was the worst sign in the zodiac, when everyone seemed to be saying that Gemini was a terrible sign. Every sign has its moment in the sun, and it has its moment when it's the worst sign ever. And there was a time when Gemini was the worst sign ever. And I remember a lot of people just saying Geminis are completely selfish. They only think about themselves. And some of that Gemini selfishness is coming to the surface today, and perhaps tomorrow as well. And it's possibly to do with the fact that the moon is in Capricorn, and I suppose Mercury is going retrograde. But you do find yourself thinking about your own interests, and you may be thinking about how you are going to benefit from particular situations, especially if you're dealing with joint finances where your financial situation is connected with someone else's financial situation. You may be starting to obsess about that a little. And you might feel bad about it. And you might find that if you mention your concerns, you might create a bad impression. You might come over as being really selfish. So you don't necessarily have to talk about it, but you possibly should accept the fact that, yeah, you do have interests. And with the moon making a sextile to Mars, Gemini, I actually think you can take steps to move forward with your interests. Yeah, I know it's Easter Monday, might be a holiday in some places, but there are things you can do to advance your agenda. And these are things you might not be entirely proud of. You don't want to boast about them, but you perhaps feel that it's necessary. So really, Gemini, you have to consider the situation. Are you acting in an appropriate way, safeguarding your own financial interests, or are you just being selfish for no good reason? So consider the situation. I think in many cases it's okay to advance your interests today, provided you're being reasonable and you're not entirely focusing on yourself to the exclusion of everyone else. Cancer. So the moon is moving through Capricorn, and Capricorn is your opposite sign. So when the moon moves through Capricorn, it's often a time when Cancerians have to think about other people. They have to realize that however independent they'd like to be, they can't escape the fact that other people do have an influence on them. And you might feel that this influence isn't entirely healthy, because you can see how self-interested certain people can be. People right now with the moon in Capricorn are tending to put themselves and their own interests first. Now, in a family setting, that might not be so much of a problem. With moon in Capricorn, people with moon in Capricorn are very, very often very focused on their own family's interests. They don't just look after themselves, but they want to look after their immediate relatives and their family unit. So if you're closely involved with members of your family, it may be not such a big issue, this moon in Capricorn. But if you're involved with people that you're not related to, friends, associates, and so on, then you might become aware of their selfishness, how they're acting in a way that is not reasonable, is just focusing on themselves. And you might also wonder whether they really know what they're doing. And that's going to be especially the case if you are in Australia and New Zealand and East Asia, because the moon, just before it moves into Capricorn, makes a square to Neptune. And so that might be your own uncertainties and your uncertainties about other people and about whether they really can be trusted. So that is something to consider. But yes, you have to take into account other people, and at the same time you have to understand their unpleasantness and their self-interestedness. But don't get too upset about it. In the process, you perhaps need to be honest about your own self-interestedness. After all, the moon is your ruler, and the moon is moving through Capricorn. So when the moon is moving through Capricorn, that tells you something about yourself. So if you are upset about someone else's behavior, ask yourself, what is the actual root cause of this being upset? Maybe the root cause of you being upset, if you get upset or annoyed about how someone is behaving, the root cause may actually be your own core self-interestedness. So perhaps you need to accept that. Accept that you have an agenda, and also accept that today there may be ways to gently proceed with this agenda. After all, the moon, which is your ruler, is sextile Mars. That is a useful aspect. And if you work with other people, mindful of our own self-interestedness, but you work with them nonetheless, and you keep some of your negativity to yourself, then I think that you can actually be quite constructive. You can allow people to work on something, and everyone can perhaps benefit. And maybe if you understand someone's self-interestedness, you can actually use that knowledge to get someone onto your side. Because if you know that someone else has an agenda, that someone is completely selfish, then all you have to do is appear to be able to further that agenda. If you can pander to someone's selfishness, then I think that you can be, in the end, gently manipulative. One final thing I should say is that today, perhaps tomorrow, depends on your time zone, Mercury goes stationary retrograde, and Mercury is in Aries. And if you happen to be working today, or you're in some organization, then you may find that something you thought was going ahead is actually not going ahead. There may be a realization that something is not working out in the short term, and that it maybe needs to be delayed. Or indeed it should be delayed. Okay, left to its own devices, people might continue with something, but if they continue with something, particularly if it's new, it might not work out very well, because there are certain details that simply haven't been fleshed out. So in a working environment, avoid being too impulsive, because certain things have not been fully worked out. And if you were to carry on with a particular idea, it may not just be you carrying on with an idea, but other people continuing with an idea, then it could go wrong. And so it might be a good idea to ask everyone to think again, to sort of review the situation, and maybe they'll come to a different conclusion. Leo. From a Leo perspective, it should be a day where things are done carefully. It's not a day for being sloppy. If you are sloppy, then you will pay the price. It's whatever has been done carelessly will just cause problems. In a worst case scenario, it might blow up in your face or blow up in someone else's face. So carelessness should be avoided at all costs, whatever your time zone. If you are in East Asia, Australia, New Zealand, the moon is square Neptune. Not such an issue if you are in Europe and the Americas, but that moon square Neptune could cause a bit of chaos. You might be doing something which you thought was okay, it seems fun, but you just continue with it, and then you realize that it's not right at all. So that's a warning if you're out east, the Philippines, Japan, Australia, New Zealand. If you are in Europe, the Americas, that's not such an issue. But still, I think it's going to be really important that everything is done by the book. After all, the moon is in Capricorn, and with the moon in Capricorn, things need to be done by the book. If you try too hard to be creative, then your creativity might backfire. Okay, yesterday might have been fine to be creative, but today, creativity for the sake of it, particularly if there's a high chance of things going wrong, or if that creativity can get out of control, creativity for the sake of it just could cause a lot of problems. So, Leo, you do have to be very careful, and if you're engaged in something important, you need to give it everything. You can't go for half measures today. You can't if you haven't got the energy or the skill to do something, then don't do it. Only do something if you have everything in place. You have full confidence in your ability to get it done. And once you start trying to get something done, you've got to give it everything you've got. Not just on a mental level, but on an emotional level. It requires absolutely everything. And even then, there could be distractions. So, given this situation, I would advise just caution throughout the day, and it's better to do nothing than to do something if that something is not something you can give your absolute 100% commitment to. So in that sense, you have a certain amount of choice. If you haven't got what it takes, then don't do it. And perhaps you should be focusing on something else. The sun is in Aries. The sun is your ruler. It's in Aries. Just do something to expand your horizons. Find out about something new, but in such a way where you're not making any commitments, where you're not doing anything that could go wrong. And perhaps that's the right approach, especially if today's a holiday, Easter Monday. That just might be what you should be doing. And really, Leo, that's probably about it. Though one thing I should say is that with Mercury going retrograde, over the next few weeks, you may want to reconsider some of your ideas and perhaps some of your travel plans. So if you've been planning on traveling, maybe over the summer, and you'd worked out where you want to go to, look at your travel plans again, because maybe there's something wrong, or you've decided to go somewhere that you don't really want to go to if you really think about it. And there's also the ethics of traveling. By ethics of traveling, just remember, Leo, that if you travel in a plane, it contributes to global warming. Think about all the sea ice that are melting because of your traveling. So do consider that. This Mercury is moving through Aries, and from a Leo perspective, that is about ethics and your philosophy on the world. And maybe there's an environmental philosophy that you should be thinking about that may relate to your travel plans. So do reconsider things like that without making any commitments. If you realize that you've got something wrong, don't immediately go and change it. Just think it through. So that might be an alternative approach. Virgo. Mercury is your ruler, and if you've been listening to my forecast for the signs, and you were listening to what I said to Gemini, I was telling Gemini that Mercury going stationary retrograde could have a big impact on them. And really, it's the same for you, because Virgo, Mercury is your ruler. And so when Mercury is going stationary retrograde, you are almost certainly going to be affected. This effect for you may be a bit different from how it was is for Gemini. You may more than usual be working on an emotional level. I think your emotions are quite strong, and with Mercury going retrograde, that can have an emotional impact. Your feelings about something may change. Your feelings might be sort of pushing you in one direction to make one decision, but your feelings are moving from one place to another. And what you felt yesterday or the day before may be different from what you felt or will feel tomorrow or the day after. So as your feelings change, you're going to have different thoughts about your feelings, and your thoughts are going to be more emotionally based than usual with Mercury going retrograde, stationary retrograde. And somehow you have to distinguish between the logical and the emotional. I mean, I know we're not supposed to categorize things, divide things up. We're supposed to see the whole. But in your case, I think the logical and the emotional have to be carefully untangled, because emotional considerations might have an impact on the way you think, and this impact might not be fortunate. So when you reach a stage of making a decision, if you feel that you're moving to a stage when a decision has to be made, ask yourself why you made that decision, because it may be that you have made that decision on the basis of something very subjective, and if you were to follow a decision through, then you might see negative results. Having said that, the moon is making a sextile to Mars. And from a Virgo perspective, I think that that sextile could be quite fortunate. I think it could allow you to enjoy yourself, and you may be able to take advantage of other people's energy. So if you can't do something yourself because perhaps you don't have the power or the inspiration, maybe you can get someone else's help. That's okay. Some people can be trusted. So if you and someone else are on the same wavelength, especially when it comes to creativity, then that could be the basis of a useful partnership. The partnership might not have to last very long, it may just be something temporary, centered around a particular goal, but whatever the time length, I do think it can be useful. And it does seem that there are one or two people around you who have a lot of mental power and energy. I think a lot more mental power and energy than you have, and they can make things simple. Just they can say something, they can sum things up, and take what, as far as you're concerned, was actually a very complicated situation, and just make it very clear. And even though Mercury is moving retrograde, that clarity is going to be real. And so if someone else explains something to you using simple words and you have a moment of clarity, then I think you can trust yourself to say, yes, that is the correct picture. And once you see the correct picture, then I think you can proceed with the day with, being fairly confident that you're on the right track. Libra, you're feeling that you don't really want to be out and about today. Certainly not in a high-profile social situation where you're having to interact with lots of different people. Yeah, I know you're a Libran, and Libra has a reputation for being a very people-orientated sign, but not at the moment. I think that Librans really do value their own space. And when you're in your own space, you're going to be most effective. And you're indeed also going to be most pleasant. And being pleasant is always important for Librans. So if you want to be pleasant, you need to be in control. When you're not in control, when you're somewhere that you've never been before, you're going to be a bit tetchy and perhaps difficult to deal with. So overall, Libra, I would suggest that you stick to home turf if possible. And this is emphasized by the fact that the moon is in Capricorn, making a sextile to Mars. The moon sextile Mars can be useful. It can suggest that you can get things done, but on your terms and in a way that is not particularly spectacular. You certainly don't want to be spectacular today. You want to work out what needs to be done, and you need to do it, and you should expect everyone else to cooperate. And if people don't cooperate, and if people raise objections to what you're planning on doing or what you want to do, then really you shouldn't have much to do with these people, because right now you don't need them. And that underlines the point that your space is important to you, and also your knowledge is important to you. You have a certain perception of the world, and also power within the world. I think you have a good sense of relative power. I think that actually is a Libran thing, because Libra is the balance. How far can the individual go before they have to start balancing their action with the pressures of society? You understand that balance very well, and what you can do, what you can't do, where you're going to start running into trouble. And I suppose it's that inner lawyer in you coming out. Regardless of whether you actually are a lawyer, every Libran does actually have an inner lawyer, even if they're not open about it. And you do understand the power equation. And if anyone is overstepping the mark and is going too far, putting themselves in a position, for example, where they might actually be running foul of the law in a sort of civil or criminal sense, you'll have a keen sense of that. And if someone is doing something wrong and is overstepping the mark, Libra, then I think you'll be able to tell them very clearly what they're doing wrong, and you'll be able to use the right language, and I don't think that you will cause offense. Scorpio, you're in a position where, as far as is possible, you're able to get your message across. Now, getting the message across today, for most people, is going to become increasingly difficult. After all, Mercury is stationary retrograde. Mercury is the communication planet. And so many of us are just finding it increasingly difficult to say what we mean, and there's plenty of scope for being misunderstood. But you, Scorpio, you can express yourself pretty well, because the moon is in Capricorn, it's sextile Mars. Mars is your ruler, and provided you keep it simple, you just use straightforward language, you can get your message out. And consider people's weaknesses, and maybe even work on people's weaknesses. A lot of people today are actually feeling quite insecure. They may not admit it, but I think they are feeling insecure. They're feeling insecure possibly in a financial sense. Even if they don't feel directly insecure, it's because of money, they are aware deep down that the world is changing and that there are larger cycles at work which could undermine everyone's financial and material security. And I think, Scorpio, you are very aware of that, and it may be a day when you feel that you want to play on that. I suppose that's a reminder that Scorpios can be quite manipulative. But I don't really mean manipulative in a particularly unpleasant way. You have to manipulate in order to get heard somehow, in order to be taken seriously. So a little bit of manipulation, working on people's fears, could be very useful. Sometimes working on people's fears it's the best way of getting someone's attention, because it's relevant to them. And if people think that you have got something to say that is relevant to them, then they are going to listen. And if you can make them slightly worried, then so much the better. You, at the same time, for yourself, you have your own worries. And I suppose this is a reminder that Mars, which is the ruler of Scorpio, is moving to a conjunction of Saturn. Okay, this conjunction doesn't happen yet, but you're starting to feel its influence. you're aware increasingly that there are going to soon be restrictions on your freedom of action, that you can only go so far. And so, Scorpio, it may be a time where you start to have to prepare the ground. Yes, if you can see restrictions coming up on the horizon, then you need to start thinking about how you're going to deal with them. Are you going to accept the restrictions and accept that there's going to be a restriction on your freedom of action? Or are you going to think about ways in which you can untangle and confront these restrictions? It really does depend on you and on your perception. Now, one thing I should say, Scorpio, is that you shouldn't entirely underestimate other people. I've talked about how you might be very persuasive in terms of how you get your message across, but there are a couple of people, perhaps people you know well, who have got a message for you, and they may have advice for you, maybe even warnings for you, but you've got to give them space, and perhaps you've also got to give them trust. People are not going to give you a warning if you haven't told them anything about yourself, because then there's nothing to warn. They don't know why you might need to be warned. But if you explain to someone knowledgeable, someone authoritative, who I think you also know quite well, if you explain the situation and you explain to them what you're planning in the short term, you might get some very important feedback. It may be feedback that you don't completely want to hear, but I think you'll accept that it's actually good advice. Sagittarius, you're in a state where you actually have something useful to communicate. And you're actually able to communicate with great power. Now, right at the beginning of this video, or fairly close to the beginning, when I was talking about the overall situation for everyone, regardless of their sign, I mentioned the fact that Jupiter was making a semi-square aspect to the Mercury-Mars midpoint. Now, Jupiter is your ruler, and if Jupiter is on the Mercury-Mars midpoint, then that is telling us how Jupiter is going to act, and it's by extension saying how you are going to act. And with Jupiter on your Mercury-Mars midpoint, you actually can express yourself with great power. You have a lot of power at your disposal, and you can use that power in a very verbal sense. And so your words could have a really big impact. But it's important that you don't say too much. There's a temptation to just keep talking with great energy. And if you talk, however energetically, people will eventually turn off. So the less said, the better, up to a point. But when you do have something to say, give it everything you've got, and your verbal power can really have a big impact, just provided you don't overuse that power. That can be a temptation with Sagittarius, to scatter its energy, to do too much, to talk too much. No, you have got to be focused, and you've got to be disciplined. Discipline is important. Concentrating on what matters and not getting caught up with stuff that is completely trivial. Now, that's Sagittarius is not what you want to do. You need to concentrate on what's important. And in that situation, I do think that people will listen to you. But you have to be aware that Mercury is going stationary retrograde. Mercury is the ruler of Gemini, your opposite sign. So that means that there are some people out there who can't entirely be trusted. Not because they're bad people, but just because they may let you down because for their own reasons. And if anyone promises anything to you today, don't take it too seriously. Or if it's important, get it in writing, because people can change very quickly. Remember, Mercury is going retrograde in Aries. Aries is a very assertive, action-orientated sign. It moves from one place to another place. People are sure they're going in this direction when they actually end up going in the other direction. And yes, Sagittarius, if you're not careful, you could be let down. And perhaps that goes back to how you communicate. You do need to make yourself clear, and today you really can make yourself clear. And perhaps what you need to try to do is impress on people what you believe, also impress on people how important it is that they behave in a particular way. And even then, don't completely trust them to honour their promises. Capricorn. Moon is now moving through your sign, and as it moves through your sign, it makes a sextile aspect to Mars. That means that today, Capricorn, I think that you can accomplish a reasonable amount. I should also say that the changeover from Sagittarius to Capricorn is important. So the moon for the last couple of days has been going through Sagittarius, and if you've been listening to what I've been saying about Capricorn with the moon going through Sagittarius, I've been perhaps indicating that it's a time when maybe you're not completely able to engage with the world around you. You want to sort of hold back a little. And now, with the moon moving through Capricorn, you're able to be yourself. And moon moving through Capricorn, sextile Mars, you can indeed be assertive in a way that you had not been able to be sort of yesterday, the day before. And that is certainly going to help you in quite a big way, even if other people, the people around you, are not on good form. Doesn't matter. You can really make things happen. So that's the broad picture. I just see someone who is finally able to come out of their shell and, yes, make things happen. There may be somewhere you have to go to, that you've wanted to go there over the last few days, but for one reason or another you haven't been able to. But now you are in a position to actually make the move. And if you go somewhere, I'm not talking about somewhere that is very far away, somewhere close by, you suddenly show up somewhere and immediately you'll make a powerful impression, because a lot of people are feeling quite confused today and they need a bit of certainty, perhaps a kind of certainty that a Capricorn can provide. Aquarius. Today, things may quieten down a bit. After all, the moon is moving into Capricorn. Capricorn is the sign immediately before Aquarius. And you might feel that it's a time of preparation, that there are things that need to be worked through. And if you were to be, for example, adopting a high-profile life, in some way you would be acting too soon, and that you wouldn't be making the most of the various energies that are available to you. And what I would perhaps suggest is that you perhaps consider the things that you are planning on doing today, Monday, and perhaps cut them in half. Just focus on the priorities that really matter. One priority that might be important to you is money. The financial dimension shouldn't be forgotten. I mean, even if it is Easter Monday, if you're in Europe, it's a holiday, I wouldn't get too worked up about that. There are, I believe, things that just need to be done, and the sooner you can get them done, the better. Now, you might get some resistance. I think there are certain people who are going to take the view that you should be spending all your time on them. Well, things have changed, and there is a little bit of seriousness in the air. If you were to spend all your time worrying about what other people are doing, listening to other people's needs, that I think in many respects would just be, at best, a waste of time, at worst, completely counterproductive, because there is some danger that you get annoyed. I think annoyance could be there, and I think that's to do with the fact that the moon is sextile Mars. I know that we normally think about a sextile as being quite a favourable aspect, but with the moon sextile Mars, for you, you might find that if things aren't entirely going to plan, that you're being told to do things that you don't want to do, your irritation might show. So, Aquarius, I would consider that. Another thing to take into account is the fact that Mercury is going stationary retrograde, and this might have an impact on your relations with other people. I've already suggested that other people should perhaps be given a bit of distance. You don't really need to have them around. And with Mercury going stationary retrograde, you might actually find that if you give people a chance, they really could let you down. They say they're going to do something and they end up doing something completely different. And that doesn't really make for a happy day. So as far as the positives are concerned, I think it's actually about money and possessions. That's something you should really concentrate on. The moon sextile Mars, which can be a negative if it's used in the wrong way, if you have to spend time worrying about the outside world. If you use it in a positive way, then I think it can be quite enriching. I mean, I'm not saying that you can make extra money today, but it's more about the preparations for future gains. And I would have said that's something that you should be really thinking about. And if you do that, okay, it might be a day that's a little boring, but I think it's a day that can, in a quiet way, be very satisfying. Pisces, you have to think about the world around you, and you have to think about how you can benefit from it. I think it's really a question of being honest. Being honest with your own self-interest. And it really is okay to have self-interest. The various things going on around you, they do have an impact upon you. And you have to consider how you can benefit from them. And also, there may be certain people, certain situations that really aren't doing you any good. They're a drain on your resources. And so think that through. It may, to an extent, be a bit of a dog-eat-dog world, but I suppose it always is. But with the moon in Capricorn, it's a particularly dog-eat-dog world. And Pisceans need to think about their own self-interests. And that moon in Capricorn is making a sextile to Mars. So moon in Capricorn making a sextile to Mars is about your assertiveness. Mars is moving through your star sign. Sorry, needn't be your star sign. Could be your ascendant sign or your moon sign. However you're reading these 12 sign forecasts. But the moon is sextile Mars, and Mars is moving through your sign, Pisces. And that does allow you to be very assertive, and you can get things done, and you can make your position clear. It's very important to make your position clear. People need to know what you approve of, what you don't approve of. And you're helped by the fact that Jupiter, remember Jupiter is your ruler. Neptune does not rule Pisces, it's Jupiter. Jupiter is semi-square the Mercury-Mars midpoint. So the Mercury-Mars midpoint as a general principle is quite an assertive coupling. You are able to say what you think, and you're able to say what you mean, and you're able to use a lot of power in terms of expressing yourself. And that self-expression doesn't have to be overused. There are just certain situations today when you need to make it very clear to other people what you want and what you don't want. And I do really think that you're going to be listened to. And this is despite the fact that Mercury is going stationary retrograde. I think with this Mercury going stationary retrograde, remember it's Mercury. Mercury rules Virgo, your opposite sign. So this Mercury going stationary retrograde could be about other people's indecisiveness. You thought people knew what they were doing. You thought that people were clear, and then you realize that they're not clear at all. And you have to deal with that situation. And one of the better ways to deal with the situation is to be clear yourself. So if other people can't make up their mind, perhaps you can make up their minds for them. Now, normally that wouldn't be good advice, because the trouble about getting people to make up their mind is that they might change their mind at a later stage. But Pisces, today, I think you really can get people to make up their mind in a lasting way, provided you've thought it through and provided that you're able to express yourself with great power. And I think that is something you can do. Okay, you still have to consider the ethics of the situation. Is it really a good idea to impose yourself on people, to force them to make up their mind? Well, it depends, and really that's something for you to work out. That's the astrology. And now I want to look at today from the perspective of the I Ching. So, as always, I threw the coins and I asked the question, what is Monday going to be like for those watching the I Ching segment of this video? And the first hexagram I got was 26, which is the taming power of the great. This suggests that many of us have got a lot of power at our disposal, but it's raw power. There are things we want to do, there are things which we can do, and the question is, how are we going to make the most of this power? If we're just powerful for the sake of it, then actually we might get nothing done. And what we have to do instead is to exercise some self-discipline. And this self-discipline may not just relate to ourselves, it may also relate to some of the people around us. We may be associating with powerful people, people who can really make a big impact. But at the moment, the power is still in a process of development, and it needs a bit of discipline and structure. And that's something that we can provide. And the moving line here, the fourth line from the bottom, is moving. And the symbolism we have here is of a bull, which is a bull. It's obviously a very powerful animal, but an animal that can cause a lot of damage, especially with its horns. And so the I Ching suggests that it might be a bull where you've attached a headboard to its horns to protect itself from causing damage to others and perhaps even damage to itself. And so where is the headboard? Where are the horns which we have to attach this headboard to? It's about restraining our own force and making sure we don't do anything careless or stupid or impulsive. But it is a positive influence. It's good that there is all this power at our disposal. We just have to focus it a little. And then that moves, fourth line from the bottom moves, and we get to a different hexagram. We get to hexagram 14, possession in great measure, which actually we've had quite recently. And possession in great measure is, as it sounds, gaining possessions. Not necessarily just money or material things. It may be about knowledge. It may be experience. It can also be about using what we have, using the possessions we have to get great results. So if we put this all together, we're in a good position. We can gain great possessions, possessions in great measure. Again, let's not just only think about money. But to begin with, we need to have some discipline and focus. Once we've got this discipline and focus, attaching that metaphorical headboard to our horns, then we can really move forward and really get quite a lot. So I think today, and maybe it's talking about tomorrow as well, could end up on a very successful note. But do take a flexible view of this idea of possession in great measure. It's not just about money and things. It's about our knowledge and our experience, which can really put us in a great position as far as getting further benefits. So that's the I Ching. And I'm now going to look at Moon in Capricorn. Now, Moon in Capricorn traditionally is not a great placing for the Moon. The Moon is in its own sign in Cancer. So it's in its detriment in Capricorn. And the Moon in Capricorn does have a certain reputation for being quite mean, because it only thinks of its own interests. I mean, how can the Moon, which is supposed to be this receptive planet, supposed to be quite sort of emotional, how does it actually work in Capricorn? And you might say, well, it actually doesn't work very well in Capricorn because it's so focused on itself. But people with the Moon in Capricorn do understand the importance of looking after their family, looking after their own interests. And that actually can be a real benefit. You know, I've known several people with Moon in Capricorn very well, and from what I've seen, the Moon in Capricorn is often a plus because they look after themselves. They don't starve. They understand their own key interest. Okay, at times they might be very selfish, but only at times of crisis. You know, they can be generous and warm until there's a challenge, when their own material interests are under threat. Then they act quickly to look after themselves. At least that's Moon in Capricorn in a theoretical sense. What about the reality of people with moon in Capricorn. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to look at a few moon in Capricorn charts. And this is my selection of moon in Capricorn charts. And so there is certainly an exaggeration here. And the worst person with moon in Capricorn, the most infamously bad person with moon in Capricorn is, well, Adolf Hitler. Yes, Adolf Hitler had moon in Capricorn. And Adolf Hitler, well, I suppose you could say he was very focused on his own interests. He had a narrow idea about interests. As far as he was concerned, the nation was all about power, the strength of the nation. There was no sense of, the common interest. It was all about the nation and power and being in control. Plus, we might get the idea here that with Hitler's chart, there's Hitler's chart, moon in Capricorn, conjunct Jupiter. We get the idea perhaps that the moon is just, in general, in certain cases, just plain malefic. And so he has moon in Capricorn conjunct Jupiter. In one sense, moon conjunct Jupiter is very fortunate. People with moon conjunct Jupiter can be lucky. So you could say, well, he was lucky, but in a Capricorn sense. And so moon in Capricorn conjunct Jupiter, he was able to take over Europe. That helped him, having moon in Capricorn conjunct Jupiter. An interesting thing about Hitler's chart, though, which I should point out, is that he has moon opposition Chiron. Moon in Capricorn, exactly opposition Chiron in Cancer. And with moon opposition Chiron, that may say something about his mother. It's always said with Hitler that he was very close to his mother, and he was devastated when she died. I think she died of breast cancer, and that perhaps completely messed him up, and that was perhaps led to a sort of permanent sense of sort of rejection or whatever. So there may be some psychological aspect to that moon opposition Chiron. And there were some other Nazis who had moon in Capricorn. For example, Julius Streicher. He was Nazi propaganda. No, not propaganda. Sorry, he was a Nazi with the lowest IQ. They did at the Nuremberg trials. All of the Nazis were given IQ tests. I mean, his IQ, I think, was something like 106 or something like that. And he had the moon in Capricorn. Now, we could see in his case. Now, Julius Streicher was a sort of journalist. He was editor of this virulently anti-Semitic newspaper, and he had moon in Capricorn. Moon in Capricorn conjunct the midheaven, assuming we've got his time correct. Moon in Capricorn conjunct the midheaven, it is about the public. Whenever you see moon conjunct the midheaven, there's an association with the public. And so when the Nazis took power, he had these really hateful speeches, which are famous for his hateful speeches. And that's moon in Capricorn in the midheaven. Just the moon in Capricorn just being mean and being unpleasant. Maybe we just need to see with Julius Streicher the sense of someone who is just has the moon in its detriment, and maybe that's all one needs to say. Another Nazi who had the moon in Capricorn was Joseph Goebbels, the Nazi propaganda minister. So with his moon in Capricorn, yes, we think about self-interest. And maybe that says something about his early career as a Nazi. So I think with Joseph Goebbels, at the beginning of his career as a Nazi, he was more on the left of the party, I think. He was more concerned about social justice and workers' rights and the socialism aspect of it. And the right, the sort of Hitler faction and the left of the party, they had a confrontation. And Joseph Goebbels immediately just forgot everything, went over to Hitler, and that was it. And I think that the left faction of the Nazis was, they weren't so concerned about anti-Semitism. Yeah, they were more concerned about the social aspects of it. At least that's how I remember it the last time I read a book about the Nazis' rise to power. And so that might be the moon in Capricorn, always having a keen sense of self-interest, and perhaps also understanding how it's working out. Moon in Capricorn can be very down to earth and very realistic. And you see also, by the way, he has moon in Capricorn square Jupiter. That might be the orator, his over-the-top speeches. But going back to the realism of moon in Capricorn, that is actually a bonus with moon in Capricorn, seeing things the way it is. And if you look at Goebbels' diaries, he was one of the first Nazis to realize that the war was lost. I think he understood that Germany was going to lose the war well before most other Nazis, most people in Germany. And that just could have been the moon in Capricorn realism. He had the information at his disposal, and that's how he saw it. He saw the way things were going to work out. Another infamous Nazi, someone I'd looked at quite recently, not a very senior Nazi, was Adolf Eichmann. Adolf Eichmann was, responsible for the deportations of Jews and others to the concentration and extermination camps. And yes, he was hanged in 1962. And he had moon in Capricorn. And what he said when he was on trial was that essentially he was just following orders. And that could be moon in Capricorn, just doing what it's told. Moon in Capricorn, he saw perhaps his job in the SS as just a job. And he wanted to do as well as possible in the SS. That's moon in Capricorn. You don't think too much about the ethics of what you're doing. You just try to do a good job, and you try to keep your masters happy. And you could say that, yes, that is what Adolf Eichmann did. And then at the end of the war, he flees to Argentina. He just gets a job, works in a lowly position. That's moon in Capricorn. He just keeps his head down. And that may be how his moon in Capricorn works. Yes, just following orders, and don't worry too much about the ethics of the issue. So those are a few Nazis who have the moon in Capricorn. Someone else who has been in the news relatively recently, who I covered just a couple of days ago, was Yevgeny Prighozin. So Yevgeny Prighozin was in charge of Wagner, this supposed private army. It's not quite a private army really, because it is connected with the Russian defense ministry. But the Wagner group took over, managed to seize Bakhmut from the Ukrainians. They have quite a reputation, not just in Ukraine, but in Africa. And Yevgeny Prighozin was a petty criminal who, at the end of as the Soviet empire collapsed, and he went to prison. I don't think he ever served in the army, even though he was head of the Wagner group. And he was known as, I think, something like Putin's chef, because his businesses he were involved with were connected with catering. And in the end, he led a rebellion. And there is a lot of stories that, in fact, he was working potentially with the West, that Western intelligence agencies had bought him off. Even though he had helped Russia capture Bakhmut, in the end he led a rebellion, perhaps with Ukrainian support. This was just a theory. We don't know quite what was going on, but he may have taken money from the West or made promises to the West. And here is someone who the Wagner, in the end, they shot down Russian aircraft, and actually Russians were killed by the Wagner group. So maybe this is telling us something about Moon in Capricorn. Moon in Capricorn is only thinking about itself in this case, in Prigozhin's case. He thinks it's in his interests to potentially take money from Western powers. If he feels his interests are under threat, he's not getting enough recognition, he's quite happy to support the other side, or at least completely undermine his own side. So that could be one way in which the Moon in Capricorn is working. Okay, let's look at someone who is very different from Yevgeny Prighozhin. Now, we have this idea that Moon in Capricorn only thinks about itself, likes the good things in life, maybe. And Melania Trump, she has the Moon in Capricorn. I don't know what time Melania Trump was born, but at noon in Ljubljana in Slovenia, the Moon was at 6-9 Capricorn. It's possible her Moon was in Sagittarius if she was born really early in the day, but I think it's very likely she has Moon in Capricorn. And the impression I get with Melania is that she likes stuff. Moon in Capricorn, she marries Donald because, regardless of what she thinks about Donald, when she married him, she probably just thought, well, he's a rich man. She's going to marry him. Moon in Capricorn, looking after its own interests. And that's the way she runs her life. And I think, from what little I know about Melania, the Moon in Capricorn seems to fit very well. Although I said there's a small chance that she has Moon in Sagittarius. There is, though, something a bit gritty about Moon in Capricorn. Moon in Capricorn can, in certain situations, be about the struggle. By the struggle, I mean the struggle perhaps against capitalism. How do we take on capitalism? How do we take on the powers that be? And Moon in Capricorn may say, well, the means justify the end. And one person who has Moon in Capricorn is someone you may not have heard of, and that is Gudrun Ensslin. Now, Gudrun Ensslin was one of the founder members of the Baader-Meinhof gang, and she was born on August the 15th, 1940, in Stuttgart. I make it at 6 a.m. And she has the Moon in Capricorn. So she went to university, went to university, she did very well at university, and she studied, and then she got involved with urban terrorism and sort of blowing things up and everything else that urban guerrillas do. And she, with that moon in Capricorn, may have taken the view that the ends justify the means. And her moon in Capricorn was trine Uranus, trine Neptune. So that really would fit the urban terrorist. And she saw the way Germany was going, and she didn't think, I assume, that the political process was going to make anything happen. So moon in Capricorn understood what needed to be done. And so in her case, moon in Capricorn was about being a terrorist. And in the end, I think she killed herself. At least the standard mainstream view is that she killed herself in prison, and I think 1977. Of course, there is a view that the German state murdered her. Another activist who has the moon in Capricorn, who I think in her own way is pretty gritty, is Greta. There's Greta, born January the 3rd, 2003 in Stockholm. I don't know what time she was born, so I've set that for midday. And you can see that at midday, moon is at 20 Capricorn. So as with Gudrun Ensslin, there is just something gritty about it, about Greta. You know, she takes things literally. She sees, global warming, climate change, and she thinks this is a problem. We've got to do something about it. And her approach, I don't know to what extent it's real, but her, not taking planes, going to the United States in a boat, there is something gritty and down to earth about it. And I think that's reflected in the fact that she's not just got the moon in Capricorn, but she's got the sun in Capricorn as well. Finally, a couple of politicians. If you're into the UK, Sadiq Khan, Mayor of London, moon in Capricorn. I get the impression that Sadiq Khan is someone who is just totally focused on being politically successful, and he doesn't care what he does, whatever it takes, and he will ally with, whatever people or organizations are required to get him up the party hierarchy. I mean, he doesn't seem to be a particularly charismatic person. He just works away. He's worked through the Labour Party system. He's now got to be Mayor of London. And so that might be just how moon in Capricorn works. It can be effective in politics. Look, he's got moon in Capricorn, trine Saturn, trine Mars. He may not be a particularly interesting person, but he just works away, takes advantage of whoever he can, whatever he can, to finally sort of work his way up the pole. The same might be said for the governor of California, Gavin Newsom, who has got moon in Capricorn. He has certainly worked his way up the party hierarchy. He has got money, so moon in Capricorn, very interested in his self-interest. I think there was an accusation that he'd sort of taken advantage of California law to benefit his own businesses. I think, was he involved in wineries? So he was, perhaps earlier in his career, he was able to use his position to help his own businesses. Maybe, I don't know. But that's Gavin Newsom, moon in Capricorn, and he certainly looks after his own interests, perhaps at the expense of other people. And with moon in Capricorn, as with Sadiq Khan, as with Sadiq Khan, it's all about making alliances, and Capricorn is very good at. But just remember, when you've got a politician of moon in Capricorn, don't believe them when they're talking about how they want to make the world a better place, because fundamentally they're looking after their own selfish interests, because that is moon in Capricorn. Okay, that's all I'm going to say about the subject. It was a bit of a confusing video because I had to change location halfway through, as you might have noticed. Apologies for that. But I hope you found this video interesting. And if you like the video, I would of course be very grateful if you were to indicate that by liking it with the like button. If you're not subscribed, I would be really grateful if you were to subscribe. And if you want to buy me a coffee, there is a link in the description. So thanks again for listening, and I will talk to you again tomorrow.